I used to work as an intern at Nickelodeon Studios, because of course I did. It wasn't paid, because that's how a fucking internship works. But I did get some perks. Mainly, I got to work close with some of the creatives on episodes. As a result of this, they would sometimes let me be a part of the group who would pre-watch episodes before they were greenlit to air later in the year. You know, to see if they were funny or any of that kind of shit. I was usually called in for SpongeBob episodes, as I tried my best to get close with those guys, as that was the only show I actually fucking liked on the network at the time. Anyways, I got called in one day to go review an episode with a bunch of other interns and people like that. They told us that they were trying something new with this episode in response to all the, at the time, new hate towards SpongeBob, as this was right after Season 6 had released, what a lot of fans at the time, and still now, consider one of the worst seasons. Anyways, I went in and took a seat on this, shitty bench to watch the episode. They started up on the big screen, and the intro played as normal. However, then the title card came up, and that's when shit started to get freaky. The title card wasn't the normal, stylistic background they would do. It kind of just looked like a shitty screenshot of the bubbles transition they would often use. Over it, written in white, just normal default text, was "Squidward is dead." I thought it was weird as hell, but I kept watching because I was just watching the fucking episode. What else was I supposed to do? Anyways, the episode started, ironically, with a bubble transition. It showed Squidward sitting on a lawn chair in his front yard. He seemed to be eating some weird-looking cake that, just from the looks of it, I could tell probably tasted like shit. As he ate it, he was also drinking something purple. I snickered to myself because it kind of looked like lean. Anyways, as he was eating, he seemed to get a little annoyed, as in the background, you could hear SpongeBob and Patrick laughing. Anyways, after a little while of this, some bubbles started coming out from behind Squidward's house. They started popping in his face, and he got really angry. So, he jumped up out of the chair, knocking his cake and lean to the floor, and ran to the back. He walked up to SpongeBob, who was blowing bubbles with Patrick, and he yelled at him. I don't really remember what he said. I think he might have just screamed something really loud in SpongeBob's face. Either way, it caused SpongeBob to get up and run into his house crying. Then, Squidward had turned to Patrick, who was just kind of looking at him. Then, Squidward said to him something like, "You better stop blowing those bubbles, Tubby." Patrick got really upset, which I was surprised by, as that seemed very out of character for him. With an angry look on his face, he stood up and punched Squidward in the face super hard. I'm talking, I could see his fist full force connecting with Squidward's jaw. Squidward fell to the ground, and he looked like me after getting slapped. For the first time, not the second time. Anyways, Squidward laid there, and he started turning a darker shade of blue as the seconds went by. Patrick, all of a sudden, went from angry to concerned, and then it cut to show blood leaking out of Squidward's mouth as he turned an extremely dark shade of blue. Patrick then ran away crying, seeming very upset for what he had done to Squidward. I was honestly astonished at what I had been seeing, as blood in kids' cartoons at the time was was certainly a no-go. But I appreciate that the crew was clearly trying to innovate. At least, that's what I thought. The episode continued, now time skipping to nighttime. However, they didn't do the usual time card they would usually do. Instead, the background just kind of faded to become darker. After just sitting on a shot of Squidward's house for a moment, it then cut to show Squidward's dead body again. Now, he was in a pool of blood. I estimated that he had been laying there for around 3 hours based on the size of the blood puddle. After a moment of just a shot of his fucking body, Squidward's corpse began to change color. He turned from a very, very, very dark shade of blue to a whitish gray. He stood up. His eyes turned yellow with dark red pupils, and they were bloodshot. He then proceeded to run into his house at superhuman or super squid speeds. Once inside, he began nailing his door shut with boards, and he kind of just shoved a bunch of objects in front of his door. He looked crazy. He looked psycho, like a psycho zombie. Anyways, he then proceeded to go upstairs to his bathroom, at which he started a bath. He then hopped in and said, "Now it's time for Squid's revenge," without the burp part. As he said this, he began to sink under the water, so the ending got a bit muffled. But I could pretty easily make it out based on context clues. Anyways, the episode cut to a next day time card, which very much so upset me, as it was inconsistent on how they were doing time skips already in the episode. It then cut to show Patrick standing outside of SpongeBob's house. He then knocks on the door and SpongeBob opens it, letting Patrick in. Patrick walks in, and right as he's about to say something, it quickly cuts to show Squidward in his shed. A shed I didn't even know he had. I guess that's a cool piece of trivia for you. Anyways, Squidward was in there collecting tools. He grabbed a shovel, a hammer, and some rope. He then leaves the shed, and it shows him walk around to the front of his house and down the street. I was wondering what he was gonna do, or what Patrick was gonna say. Either way, my curiosity got the best of me, and I also kinda had no choice, so I continued watching. It immediately cut to show the Krusty Krab. It was empty. Squidward then walked in and immediately ran for Mr. Krabs' office. He opened the door, and Mr. Krabs greeted him in the happy tone he usually does, saying, "Ahoy, Mr. Squidward." Squidward just ignored him. He turned around and locked the door. He then proceeded to start walking towards Mr. Krabs' desk where he sat. Mr. Krabs said, still in an upbeat but now slightly concerned tone, "What are you doing, Mr. Squidward?" However, soon Mr. Krabs began screaming as Squidward pulled out his hammer and smashed it against Mr. Krabs' forehead, sending him to the ground. Blood sprayed everywhere, and it was hyper unrealistic. I could tell that shit was fake from a mile away, but still, I was appalled. Like, how could they show this in a kid's cartoon? Then Squidward pulled out his shovel and began stabbing Mr. Krabs in the chest repeatedly. I turned around and saw one of my fellow co-workers or whatever throwing up in a bag, which then made me realize that I had to assert my dominance over the others in the room. So I immediately started watching like it was nothing, as I had to prove to my peers that I wasn't what the kids call these days a bitch. Anyways, the episode abruptly cut to show SpongeBob and Patrick talking in SpongeBob's house. Patrick was stumbling over his words, stuttering, seeming to not know how to say what he wanted to say. It cut to show SpongeBob's face. He had a weird look on his face, clearly trying to decipher what Patrick was yapping about. Soon after, Patrick just kind of blurted out that he killed Squidward. SpongeBob then yelled at him, "Patrick, what the fuck?" Which made me start laughing, because SpongeBob saying fuck is very funny. However, this laugh was short-lived, as soon there were loud bangs on the door. SpongeBob and Patrick turned to see the door opener thingy start turning. However, it was locked. But somehow, Squidward proceeded to kick the door in, knocking it off the hinges. He then walked in. He had a saw in one hand and a hammer in the other. SpongeBob and Patrick started screaming. Squidward began running at them. However, SpongeBob and Patrick both ran and jumped out the window. However, SpongeBob double-took and looked back and yelled, "Gary!" But it was too late, as we can see Squidward smashing Gary with his hammer. Patrick then grabbed SpongeBob and they started running away as SpongeBob began crying. At this point, I didn't even really care about the gory imagery. I just wanted to see where things went, because I was kind of invested in the lore, so I kept watching. The episode then immediately cuts to show SpongeBob and Patrick sitting around a campfire in the middle of nowhere. It's dark out, and they're both cold, just kind of sitting there, clearly terrified. After a little while of silence, aside from the sounds of the campfire, we can hear what sounded like the sound Squidward makes when he walks. SpongeBob and Patrick noticed, and they began looking around cautiously. Then, out of nowhere, Squidward jumps out, screaming, "SpongeBob!" SpongeBob and Patrick jump up and run away. However, Squidward runs after them with a psycho look on his face. That look on his face scares me even to this day. I think about it every time I wake up in the morning, and man, I hate it. I can't get it out of my head. But anyways, Squidward runs after SpongeBob and Patrick, and it cuts to show their angle, it shows them running towards the screen. As they run, Patrick all of a sudden gets grabbed by a lasso that was thrown and pulled back. SpongeBob screams for him, but can't help him. He just continues running. It then cuts to show Patrick being pulled back before hitting the ground. Squidward quickly ties him up before then pulling out a grenade, pulling out the pin, and stuffing it in Patrick's mouth. He then runs away. It cuts back to show SpongeBob running, and in the background we see an explosion. SpongeBob screams. However, he's able to run into the Krusty Krab. He goes to Mr. Krab's office. However, he then screams. It cuts to show what SpongeBob saw. Hanging from a noose is Mr. Krabs' corpse. The top of his head is crushed in, and he's covered in blood, with there being a gaping hole in his stomach with blood and organs dripping out all over his desk. SpongeBob then turns around to see Squidward come in the door. I was eagerly awaiting how the episode would end. As mentioned previously, I was deep into the lore at this point. Squidward comes into Mr. Krabs' office as SpongeBob slowly walks backwards. As Squidward pulls out a wooden baseball bat, he says, "I got you now." However, SpongeBob, surprisingly, because he was kind of acting like a pussy, kicks Squidward so hard that Squidward flies out of the room and hits into the glass window. He doesn't even break it or shatter it, because he's not a foam eraser or something. He kind of just falls to the ground. Anyways, SpongeBob runs behind the desk and hides. However, in the background, we hear the door open, and Squidward says, "Oh, so someone's come back for more. This will be easy." Then we hear a ton of guns loading, just sounds like a gun sound effect loading, just put on top of itself multiple times, sometimes out of sync. It was actually really fucking annoying. Then Squidward yells, "Oh no," before we proceed to hear a shit ton of gunshots. I think there was at least 30,000. I couldn't really keep track. However, after that, we cut to show SpongeBob finally walking out of Mr. Krabs' office. And it cuts to show Patrick standing over Squidward's dead body holding a minigun. He says, "Nobody calls me Tubby." SpongeBob runs up and hugs Patrick, before then looking up at him and saying, "Patrick, you're a Tubby." Patrick gets really fucking mad. However, before we can see what happens, the episode ends, which leaves me very disappointed, as I was, like I said, very invested in the story. I stood up and began clapping as everyone else in the room started running out, calling other people like CEOs and the cops even, and Steven Hillenberg. But they didn't get it. They didn't see the vision, the potential I saw. This was one of the most innovative, action-packed episodes of SpongeBob I've ever seen. It was nothing like any other episode, and I'm sure it would have been critically acclaimed. However, I guess the others didn't feel the same. The cops showed up, and they took a look at the episode file, and as far as they could tell, it looks like the episode had been edited a few minutes before we had watched it. Nothing else really came out of any investigations other than that. All we had to go off of was theories. Personally, I just assumed that it was some lol epic prank by someone in the studio, or maybe some hack or something. Either way, I'm very ashamed in Nickelodeon for not taking the risk of airing this episode. However, I still have traumatic memories about this, and every day I wake up pissing and shitting and coming and crying because I have that picture of Squidward imprinted in my mind, and it tortures me daily